Just like every other game out there, the 1996 id Software original FPS game Quake has quite a bit of cut, cancelled, unused, and unreleased content, but unfortunately never made it into the final game. But, lucky for us, some of that content can still be found for the final release's files and be various beta tests, both official and unofficial. The original Quake is one of my favorite games, and since I made a good handful of videos on Doom's cut content, I figured that it was time to move on to another great franchise. In today's video, we're going to be going over the assortment of content that was removed from the original Quake at various points of development, including cut enemies, weapons, items, and graphics, along with a handful of things that have simply been changed or altered. All of this content and information has come from various sources like John Romero interviews, the Quake Wiki, Unseen64, and a handful of other places that will be mentioned in the description. So while this may not be every single frame of unused material, it will be a hefty portion of it pulled from the final product, the 1996 Q-Test, and the infamous Beta 3, which leaked only 11 days before the game's release. I felt like the best place to start was with our favorite FPS protagonist, Ranger. On the sprite sheet that features Ranger's facial expressions used for the HUD, it's possible to see 7 total facial expressions that went completely unused. The first 4 have a pretty unique animation of the Ranger being jibbed, which is pretty hardcore. 2 of them show the Ranger sticking his tongue out at the camera, which is pretty quirky and was probably meant to be used for a power-up of sorts. If I had to guess, I would say it was probably the quad damage, judging by the eyes. The final unused facial expression is a variation of the already in-use reaction to acquiring the Pentagram of Protection. As for the Ranger's inventory, which is always displayed on screen during combat, there are several unused sprites for weapons, power-ups, and keys. It turns out that the alternate key variations were meant to be displayed with their own unique textures once acquired, but this was cut for some reason. You can also see the removed glow animations, which would have played when the keys were picked up, but unused glow sprites aren't exclusive to keys because you can also see them for the shotgun. This is a weapon that you spawn with and can acquire though, so these were obviously never used. This specific sprite sheet also gives us a look at unused items like the Hellgate Cube, which would have followed you around and destroyed enemies. The boots and the jetpack can also be seen, both of which would have helped the player with speed and altitude respectively. As much as I'm sure that you'd love to keep looking at unused sprites, I think we should move on to the unused enemies, like the dragon. Quake was originally supposed to have a dragon enemy that would remain in the skybox and occasionally swoop down to attack the player, but this was cut for a number of reasons. Quake features mostly inside levels, with the outside ones not having a big enough skybox to fit the dragon in a satisfying way, and that ended up being one of the many reasons why the dragon was removed. The dragon can actually be seen in official pre-release screenshots, and the textures could be found in the files of the Q-Test. 2 other unused enemies were found in the Q-Test as well, those being the Vomitus and the Serpent. The Vomitus was a large blob that would vomit smaller versions of itself to attack the player, and it also had a slow melee attack. This concept would later be reused for the Hellspawn in Quake's second expansion. The unused Serpent enemy would have been able to fly around at high speeds and swiftly attack the player, but it had very little room to move and was left completely unfinished. Both the Vomitus and the Serpent have no textures or animations, and they have remained completely void from the Quake franchise since they were removed initially. The Q-Test also provided us with an interesting look at an unused version of the Vor enemy, which appeared to have a cloak, and that was obviously removed in the final game. This design does kinda fit the wizard-like nature of the creature, but certainly isn't final game material. The last unused enemy variation we have today is the Axe Ogre, who was an early version of Quake's Ogre that would have used a shield and an axe. This version of the Ogre also had horns and slightly different textures, which is to be expected from an unused version. Ogres were originally supposed to laugh and urinate on the player's corpse after killing them, and although it was unfortunately removed, that certainly would have fit this fella right here. Speaking of the player's untimely demise, there are 5 cut death messages that were never used in-game. And while one of them refers to Satan, this isn't a cut enemy of any sorts, it's a reference to the Pentagon of Protection. There are still various smaller map changes that were cut from the game before launch, but if we went over all the tiny details like that, we would probably be here all day. A few smaller sounds got cut from the game as well, like the ambient sound of thunder and a Death Knight grunt, but for the most part, the cut sounds were re-added with the 2021 remaster and are no longer cut content. So, with that, the bigger pieces of unimplemented content have now been rediscovered. There's always a chance that I'll come back and do a part 2 with the remaining sprites and audio files, but for today, I think we're good. So if you end up enjoying the video and want to see more Quake and Doom content, then be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I do interesting discussion videos like this along with Doom and Quake news all the time, so there's a chance that I could come in handy. But anyways though, I think that's just about all I have to say for today's video, so thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the cut content. Until next time.